Well, greetings everyone, and welcome to a very special online event today. It's called Mystical Kabbalah and the Psychology of Consciousness. Breathe with the divine through ancient mystical wisdom for a deep spiritual connection. My name is Stephen Dye. I'm the founder and president of the Shift Network, and I have always loved the Kabbalah because it's a sophisticated, deep metaphysical system that really offers a way to balance the many currents of spiritual and embodied life in a way that I've really found very helpful. So we're going to get to dive in to the profound wisdom in this system with a beautiful pioneer and wisdom teacher in it. His name is Les Lancaster. He's the co-founding director of Alef Trust. And I think you're going to really enjoy him. So, Les, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Stephen. Good to be here.
Great. Well, I know we're going to have this time together, and we're excited that you're teaching a brand new course for Shift on Kabbalah and the psychology of consciousness that we'll share more about towards the end of the hour. So, more to come if you're inspired by what you hear today. So let's begin our time together with a little bit about your backstory. What led you to Kabbalah and really seeing this as such a primary path for your life?
Well, that's quite a long story, but let me start by saying that I've always, from as early as I can remember, I think I was fascinated by the mind, by, what makes us who we are. And I think, that fascination led me in my early 20s in two directions. One, I got involved with psychology, and back then I was offered the opportunity to get into research in psychology, and that's where the path I followed. And then I've had, career over 50 years in that direction. But at the same time, at that, that period in my life, I was introduced to the Kabbalah, and I found it a really interesting system. I guess I was searching around a little bit for a path of meaning in my life. So I met some people who were working with the Kabbalah, and yeah, I took that step and got involved, and I've been studying it ever since. It never seems to come to the bottom, as it were. It's such a rich, profound system. And, so I had two things going on in my early 20s. One, I was researching in psychology. I was particularly interested in the relationship between the two hemispheres of the brain. That was my kind of my day job, as it were. Um, but the interest in the Kabbalah, as I got more in and read around it, and I was looking at some of the practices, I found that went so much deeper than the psychology. In fact, in those days, we're talking about this 1970s, my interest was in consciousness, and even, that word was almost taboo in university psychology department. So I knew that, I had to work with these two areas and hope that they would come together and work to bring them together, which I did over the years because Kabbalah is about who we are and why we're here and how does consciousness work. And these are all questions that are part of psychology. So, over many years, I've worked and written a lot about the psychology of consciousness, about spirituality in psychological terms. So that's my
Beautiful.
path.
Well, I'm intrigued with it. You're doing this research into the two hemispheres of the brain, and one of the things that I've always found helpful about Kabbalah is that it doesn't just map levels, that you have this kind of left, right kind of pathways that's sort of balancing your overall system and sort of map onto the human energy system in different ways. And I wonder if you could just maybe walk us through that sort of mapping the tree of life, the Sephirot, as like, at least on the high level, to understand how this creates a more multi-dimensional map of our growth and evolution and embodiment as well.
Well, the tree of life is the central symbol of the Kabbalah. And it's an image of, in religious terms and metaphysical terms, it's an image of the way in which heaven and earth relate, or the ways in which the divine, or the source of all, emanates, and how that interrelates with our own psychology. So, but as you say, it's not just a vertical relationship with, the divine at the top and the world down below, as it were, but it has multi dimensions. So you're right. I started my psychology career working to discern what was going on with the right side and the left side of the brain. It didn't take me long to see that there was a connection with what the Kabbalists were saying, and obviously the two different paths, one scientific research, and the other would be the root meaning of the word Kabbalah means to receive. So
Mm,
it's kind of received or revealed wisdom. And it was fascinating that these two paths are coming together. So in the tree of life, the at the top of the right side is the concept of wisdom or insight. On the top left is understanding. And when you delve into the complex of meanings around these two sephirot, as they're called, these two spheres, then they certainly relate to what we know scientifically about the two sides of the brain. In fact, early on in my career, again, back in my 20s, I wrote an article about how the two sides of the brain relate to what's going on as far as the Kabbalah is concerned.
mm. Great explanation. So yeah, one of the things I've really taken away from studying is this need for balancing of apparent opposites. So that's part of the human the sort of path of instead of just one being virtuous, that it's like the balance between compassion and setting right boundaries or justice or things like there's a way in which sometimes we think in an elevation of one term and then not remembering that actually you have to balance out with the other side in order for us to really have wholeness. I wonder if you
Okay.
could speak to how that's sort of, played out in your own spiritual path working with this system.
Well, I think that balance is right at the center of what the Kabbalah is about. I mean, I think you could say that about many mystical systems as well. You know, one of the major works of the Kabbalah, the Zohar, it's the central text for the Kabbalah. It has many strata within it, and some of the more esoteric aspects of that work are really talking about what it is to be in balance. And it's talking about this in the divine. The divine is seeking a way to be in balance. And as humans are, as it were, in the image of the divine, so that applies to ourselves as well. And of course, it's a very simple point to make that we need to find balance in our lives. And I think the Kabbalah brings a great balance between, the role of practice, the role of the breath, for example, and sort of more intellectual questing for for what it is to be in a relationship with the source, with the divine. So yes, and the tree, which you alluded to, is all about balance. I mean, it's essentially comprised of a set of triads.
Mm.
It's a threefold structure when you really analyze it. And the pattern of three, which has a long metaphysical history, it is about finding a way that a third principle can balance two. So you alluded, I think, to some of the sephirot, some of the areas of the tree. So one would be loving kindness, the urge to be generous and to be loving. And on the other side of the tree is the concept of judgment or limitation. So, to be too far on the loving side, it doesn't necessarily bring the right balance. You've got to have those two in balance, and the sephirah, the emerging concept from that balance, has the name, it's Tiferet in Hebrew, which means beauty. And that's the point, that achieving balance is what we understand as beauty. Around us, in the world around us, there's always balance in one way or another, and that can be beautiful, but of course in ourselves. And one of my main interests, and you'll know this, Stephen, from the outline of this whole course, one of my main interests is balancing, to use the word again, what we know of science in our current age and the wisdom that comes from ancient traditions. And we need both. We can't just look backwards and say, oh, those ancients, they knew everything. Let's be like them. It's not the way of the world. And the Kabbalah itself has gone through many reformulations with different ages. So it's not just a kind of monolithic tradition. And I would say that we are in a kind of a new age, an age in which things are changing in such rapid way. So to talk about globalization or to talk about, the coming together of differing traditions. Some talk about this as the unitive age, or I think it's transpersonal. We're going beyond these separate tribal or individual divisions and trying to aspire to a more unitive way of being. I mean, it's very hard. There's things going on in the world today which are horrendous, but we need to move beyond that. And I think that, the Kabbalah historically has always unfolded in relation to the needs of its age. And I think that's what we're seeing today. So in this course, that's really what I want to do. I come as a psychologist. I come as someone involved with religion and psychology to bring these all together and to produce a way of working which is really solid. It's got rich ancient foundations, but it has scientific foundations as well.
Hmm.
And that's the quest I'm interested in. And I've written a
Good
lot
point.
about the coming together of science and mysticism.
Yeah. And I want to ask first before we go into a little deeper into that, like a little bit more about how what one of the things I like about Kabbalah is that it sort of really honors the embodied worldly life as much as the sort of, there's not really the same ascetic tradition as a lot of the Eastern. So it's like the Shekinah, that expression into embodied form, embodied life has sort of real honored value rather than just the transcendent current, if you will. I wonder if you could just talk about that within the context of this kind of harmonization function that we're doing internally and externally as.
So yes, yes. So if I start on that science side, actually, and then I'll bring it to the Kabbalah. I've worked a lot and written a lot, done a lot of research about consciousness. And there's no question in my mind that we have to understand embodiment. Consciousness is not something floating up there. It's to do with embodied being. And this is one of the, I think, profound aspects of the Kabbalah and within Judaism as well as a religion, that embodiment is crucial. The Shekhinah, you mentioned the Shekhinah, which is the feminine dimension of the divine, and just the idea that the divine is not male, the divine is a combination of what, as it were, all genders and none. So the Shekhinah is the root, Hebrew root means to be present in a way, to dwell. And so we think of this as the presence of God in the physical. It's like when you have those moments. We all have these moments when, I don't know, you may be in a wonderful place in nature, and it's like a moment of stillness and something is present. You can't maybe quite put your finger on it, but you have the sense that there's something maybe of the divine or maybe of the presence of the whole universe filling that moment. I mean, that's traditionally what the Shekhinah represents. And in terms of our own embodiment, everything that happens in the body, I mean, all the all the functions, as it were, are the ideal is that we have a transcendent dimension there. It's not that there's a kind of division between spirit and body, which is a very outmoded view, I think, for our modern world. But our quest is to find the divine, to find that spiritual quality in all actions that we do.
Hmm, so beautifully shared. I wonder if you could share a little bit more about this sort of the quantum sort of understanding that's emergent in science and how that relates to Kabbalah.
So, it goes back to what I was saying just now about different ages. Um, in the 30th century, the Kabbalah unfolded to relate to what was going on in that era. In the 17th century, similar. So there's whole, phases. And when you think about the age we are in today, I used the word before, unitive or transpersonal. I think there's been a resurgence of interest in the spiritual and the mystical. Really, at the core of that, of our age, is our understanding of reality. And our understanding of reality since kind of 1900 is not the same as it was, hundreds of years ago. And at the forefront of that, I think, two disciplines, physics and psychology. It's really interesting that the sort of seeds of both modern psychology and modern physics were laid in the year 1900. Freud in psychology, Max Planck in physics, and then Einstein coming along shortly afterwards. So, quantum, the idea of relativity and the idea of quantum, it's a redefinition of how we view reality. The fact is, I mean, in the Kabbalah, you can find ideas about the relativity of space and time way back in early sources. It wasn't backed up by formulae in the way that Einstein backed up his idea, but conceptually, metaphysically, the relativity of the world in which we live, I think that's an idea deeply within the Kabbalah. And so too, if I go to the other side, psychology, I mean, the idea that there is an unconscious, some of the deepest wisdom is, as it were, bubbling up from the unconscious. And that again is there in the sources of Kabbalah.
That's so beautifully shared. I wonder if you could give us a little bit of a glimpse into the many practices, because I understand every Sefirot and every pathway connecting Sefirot has its own meditative inquiry and process around that. Can you share a little bit about how you can practice with the Tree of Life as a spiritual practice?
Well, there are many practices, but I think what goes right to the heart of the matter is working with the breath and working with the names of God. So you mentioned this Sephirot, the tree of life. Each Sephirah, each point in that tree is associated with the name of God. So one of the practice that I work with is really associated with the top of that tree. The name that was revealed to Moses in the book of Exodus, which is not easy to translate, but God says that his name is I shall be that which I shall be. Now, we could spend hours talking about what that actually means. But in terms of practice, it's very interesting that the Hebrew for I shall be, the word is ehyeh, ehyeh. It's very obvious. I mean, you can almost hear it there, that really this is about the breath. So if you think of an in-breath, that sound, but just it's on the breath. And the out-breath, so here's this insight that whatever the divine is, in a way, our connection with that is through the breath. And that's where a lot of the practices really take root. Do you want me to
Yeah, I think it'd be great
take
to
that for,
do a
yeah?
demonstration now with folks.
Well, I don't know about demonstration. It's never easy,
Or a
We don't just turn it on and turn
taste,
it off, as it
taste,
were. But
maybe.
let me talk this through and bring everyone into a little practice. Okay, so I mean, coming to the breath, let's do that for a few minutes. Um, that name, I said how this word I shall be is almost like the in-breath and the out-breath. But the full name has this reflexive quality because it's I shall be that which I shall be. The Hebrew would be ehyeh, isheh, ehyeh. And so as a practice, okay, we'll do this. We'll do this now. Let's settle down, be in a comfortable posture. If you can keep your back upright, that's great. And you may want to close your eyes. So in coming to the breath, the first thing to notice is actually how we breathe. The first thing is that we make space. The muscles and the ribs and the diaphragm, we open a space and the air comes into that space. And then vice versa to breathe out. So that's what we mean by breathing. So let's just go with that a bit. Open the space. Be aware of the breath coming in through the nostrils and out through the mouth. Cool air, dry air coming in. Warm, moist air carrying out. And if you can, just remember those sounds, not out loud, but inwardly, with the in-breath, the A sound, with the out-breath, the ye sound. So I'm going to bring an additional element in. In the Kabbalah, we say that the heart is the center of the breath. So we're going, as it were, beyond the physiology here. So when you breathe in, bring that awareness that you're breathing into the heart space. And we're going to go beyond the physiology in another way. I want you to imagine that you're breathing in from above your head. So you're breathing from above the head into the heart, and from the heart back above. And I'm going to add another dimension to this. This practice is really very simple, but to explain gets complicated. So just try and stay with it, because we're going to bring in the whole reflexivity of this name. And it goes like this. So you're breathing in from above to the heart. And from the heart, breathing out down below, right into the earth. And then from the earth, the next in-breath, coming back to the heart and breathing out above. Like I say, it might sound complex. If you practice this, it becomes very easy. You're breathing in from above, the sound of air on the in-breath to the heart. Out-breath takes it down below. Next in-breath comes from below to the heart. And out-breath from the heart back above. And obviously that just repeats. And you can add a little movement of the head. So when you're breathing from above, the head is slightly up, just a little bit to the heart. And then when you breathe down, just bring the head down a little bit. It helps to get that flow, sense of direction. So I'm going to keep quiet for just a minute or two. Give you time to connect with that breathing practice. Notice that your heart becomes the pivotal point, linking above and below. So let's just let that go. Maybe you want to just open your eyes, check in, check your body, in balance, everything in balance. So Stephen, that's just a little sample. I mean, clearly, we need to work on that. But
Hmm.
hopefully it gave a little flavor of something that we can do.
Yeah, there's real depth in your voice too that speaks to the practice you've done in this lineage. So thank you for that little taste.
Mm.
I know that you wanted to sort of deepen some of what we've been sharing in the form of like some PowerPoint slides to help understand this mapping a bit. Do you want to do that now?
Yeah, I will do. Actually, I just want to say one thing before I do that. We talked about balance before, and the Kabbalah is a great deal about balance. It's also a lot to do with language. Kabbalah, in some ways, is a mysticism of language, and language, it's not just something we kind of talk to each other. It's great. But language, in a psychological and even a philosophical sense, is about our relationship to the things, how we structure
Hmm.
reality.
Hmm.
And, in that name, it's I shall be that which I shall be. In the middle of it is a relative pronoun, which, right? In the Hebrew, that is a word, the word is asher. Okay. The same root or the same letters produce another word, osher. You can see that here the connection, asher, osher. Osher means happiness. And I wanted to say this because I think, firstly, it's an indication of how the Kabbalah works, working with letters and words, but it's a very great insight because that point about relationship. So one word means which is about relationship, and the same word, slightly pronounced differently, means happiness. Now,
Hmm.
of course, relationships can go wrong. We know that, right? But fundamentally, being in relationship, and I don't just mean with another human, although that's great as well, but with the world around us and obviously ultimately with God, that's where meaning and happiness lies. So this, a simple name, just a few words, it conveys something very profound. So it's worth dwelling, a little challenge to anyone who's watching this. That relationship, what is it about? Why is it reflexive? So it's as if God is saying to Moses, okay, you want to know my name? Tell you what it's really all about. I want to be in relationship. God wants to be in relationship. That's what the creation is about. So just a few extra words, but I'll share the slides now, okay?
Sounds great.
Um, okay, let's do this. Let's do this. So I said there's an importance in language, and at the core of language are letters. So the Kabbalah has a lot to do with letters. Here's the first letter of the alphabet, going way back to the Aramaic, about what, 2,500 years ago. And I want you to see in this letter, this is the first letter of the alphabet. In Hebrew, it's Aleph. Our letter A derives from the same historical basis. Notice this letter has this connotation of relationship. Okay? So effectively two triangles, or it's a line with points going up and down. The letter itself is about relationship. This is the modern Hebrew form, which, well, you can see goes back to about 100 BCE, derived from the Aramaic. And it too has this connotation of the relationship above and below. So that little practice that I did, and we just sampled, I mean, we'd have to take it further. It already is about the core Kabbalistic idea of balance above and below.
Hmm.
So that letter, Aleph in its modern form, the the scribal tradition, in other words, if you're writing a sacred text like the Torah, then you have to write it correctly. And the scribal tradition says, well, this is composed of three other letters. At the top, you've got another letter. I know people won't be familiar with the Hebrew, but just take it from me. This other letter, it's called Yud, means a hand. The middle part is connected with another letter, Vav, which means a hook. And then at the bottom, you've got this inverted example of the top one. So it's another hand. Just think about that. It's again a profound idea. One hand hooked or connected with another hand. Isn't that about our lives? Whether you're thinking about it with another human, with a baby, or again with a higher connection to the source, to what people might call the divine. This is how Michelangelo conveyed it, the creation of man. One hand connecting with another. So much in that. It's interesting, might be interested that Michelangelo seemed to have depicted a brain actually in that image. Uh, we can think about the reasons why that would be.
Hmm.
But
I've never seen a brain
one
overlay.
letter,
That's fascinating.
yeah, it's clever. It's very clever. So the main point here, though, is one letter, the letter Aleph, the first letter of the alphabet, and has a deep meaning in the way it's constituted.
Hmm.
That's something that I'm very interested in. Within this course, we're going to be looking at that and taking that further, looking at other letters.
So it seems like if that's the first letter of the alphabet and it's based upon this sacred relationship, that's really the foundation of the deeper work here.
Exactly, it's the foundation. And as I say, each letter, for example, the next letter in our alphabet will be A, B. In Hebrew, it's Aleph, Bet. Where do we sound the letter B? It's at the front of the lips. It's symbolizing that behind everything is the Aleph, but when it comes to creation or manifestation, it's right at the front. I mean, it's the most explosive sound we have. But so there's deep meaning in that. Before we mentioned this, you talked about the tree of life, and I picked up on that. This is the tree of life. It's very complex. It's easy to draw it. It's a very nice picture, as it were. I put in the Hebrew terms and I put in the translations. I'm not going to talk about that directly. What I want to do, because it's so complicated, I mean, obviously in the course we'll go into that in more detail. I want to make the point in more detail the point I made before about the connection with modern science, and in this case, psychology. So, from the Zohar, major text of the Kabbalah, there's a passage here about the nature of thought. Now, I'm not going to read it because we don't have a lot of time, but what it's saying is that the source of thought is concealed, and then it comes through into manifestation. Okay, and you can see here, in the midst of thought, that relates to the first sephira, the essence of the divine. And then a desire arose to have concealed thought. Now, that relates to what I said earlier about psychology, that thought in the unconscious is concealed, but that's where wisdom lies. Next step is it talks about the larynx. This is on the tree, as you can see, the spirit of life, Bina, understanding. It's very interesting psychologically. We know that think when you're thinking to yourself, you're not saying anything out loud, but we do know that the larynx is activated. It's like silent thought. So here in the Kabbalah, centuries ago, same idea. And then it moves forward further, and I'm not going to go into details because we don't have a lot of time. But the air, fire, and water is when we did that exercise. Of course, the air is dry coming in, but when it comes out, and to speak, it's the out breath. So the air coming out from the lungs is moist and it's warm, fire, right? So this is, again, it's a way of conceptualizing the process whereby we go from inner thought, deep, profound thought, to ultimately speaking. Yeah, the voice, and the voice operates through the mouth, through the lips, and finally comes out as speech. So it's all there. I did that quickly because I didn't want to spend the time reading the quote, but it's just to illustrate that, contemporary psychology has a lot in common with some of the deep ideas in the Kabbalah. That's what I want to explore.
Hmm. That's very exciting. And how would you say, so you've obviously studied a lot of transpersonal psychology as well. Like how does this map into different levels of consciousness and awareness in
Yeah,
people?
that's an important question. So, what is a level of consciousness? What's a higher state of consciousness? If you think about it, there's two sides to that. One is detaching from our mundane way of working. And really, that's about the ego, the sense of drive, the sense of desire. So, an altered state or a higher state of consciousness tries to detach from the sort of cravings or, the ego. We get locked into patterns of thinking. A lot of mental health problems are really around the way we get locked into destructive patterns of thought. So a higher state of consciousness is, on the one hand, trying to detach from maybe not such healthy way of thinking. And on the other, there's a sort of, it's like what we saw with the tree, there's another side. So aspiring to a higher state of consciousness is really trying to connect with something larger than oneself. I mean, there are many ways we can do that through the breath. I mean, that really, that little practice we just sampled, that's what it's about, connecting above, which is larger than ourselves, and obviously into the earth as well, because we're that pivotal connection above and below. And you know what? If you practice that for a prolonged period of time, there will be an altered state, will be higher consciousness. We know, I mean, all kinds of meditations are going to change the state of consciousness. So, psychology and transpersonal psychology is about understanding these different states. How do we achieve the states? What are the embodied correlates and changes in the brain? We know, I mean, there's a lot of research looking at how different systems in the brain are turned on and off depending on where we're at in the meditative practice, for example. So, so we're trying to marry that, or I'm trying to marry that onto what the Kabbalah is trying to achieve. And I think it's a very rich marriage, really.
Mhm. I wonder if you can speak a little bit towards to some of the mystical states that can unfold as we sort of explore deeper into each facet here. So are there different qualities of realization and recognition that tend to open and with in relationship with different sephirot?
Well, each Sephiroth has a complex of ideas around it. So I think I indicated that before. For example, we'll take one Sephirah, um, Tiferet, the one in the center. It means beauty, okay? But, that doesn't convey a great deal. But when you start to study the Kabbalah, you look at all the kind of symbols that revolve around that, then you can start to understand something about how that Sephira is active within myself. For example, um, in the biblical story, the Tiferet, the center of the tree, is represented by Jacob. Now, what happened in Jacob's life? He wrestled with God. It's a whole story. I mean, some will know it, some maybe don't know the story. We haven't got time to go into that, but in the course, we can go into those ideas more. What does it mean to wrestle with God? I mean, he wrestled with an angel, but traditionally, well, actually, it doesn't even say an angel. In the text, it says he wrestled with a man. The understanding, and it comes in later in the text, is that it's an angel. But what's an angel? So, in a sense, he is wrestling with God. And what does that mean? Now, and you say about what kind of state of consciousness is that related to? Well, the text says that they stayed up all night. They were wrestling all night. And the sort of the activity of their wrestling went right up to the highest point of heaven. Okay, Stephen, do you ever wrestle with what you may think of as the divine? You know, it's a very interesting point that in the story it says he wrestled with the man. I said that before. In other words, the beginning of this, because we're all wrestling, we're all questing, we're all struggling one way or another. It says he struggled with the man because that's how it's real for us. Our relationships, things we encounter, to try and see that there's actually something behind these encounters. Now, that is a higher state of consciousness. When the sort of surface level falls away. So you meet someone and you think, oh well, it's just an everyday meeting, no problem. But something happens, something dawns. Maybe it's going to be the beginning of an amazing romantic relationship, or maybe it's actually a teacher. Someone is going to teach you something. You don't realize the start, but then something opens up, and that is a different state of consciousness. Now that's related to Ferret. We would relate that psychologically to the self. You know, a lower stage is the ego, but I mean, Jung talked a lot about this, Carl Jung. The self is a higher state of being. And when you have a sense of, that a higher quality, which you can't necessarily put easily into words, but it does impact in your life, it changes things. That's a higher state of consciousness.
Hmm. Beautiful. Well, Les, you're clearly so steeped in this tradition in a way that really illuminates it in beautiful ways. So I want to talk a little bit about your upcoming course where people have a chance to go deeper. And so we're really blessed that Les has agreed to teach this course. It's called Kabbalah and the Psychology of Consciousness. Experience the divine through a synergy of breath, mysticism, and transpersonal transformation. You can find it at the URL kabbalahcourse.com, kabbalahcourse.com. It's a 7-week program. You don't have to have any particular background, and it really is applicable to seekers of whatever faith or tradition or no tradition are drawn, because it's really more of a mapping of our development process rather than a particular set of beliefs. And so I'd love for Les you to share in your own words about some of your intentions for what people will come away with from this course, and then we'll go through the modules.
Well, I want us to really understand the history. So, it doesn't happen in a vacuum, and it's like I was talking before about the different ages. And I think that, you know, in our day, we're going beyond a kind of tribalism. So that relates to what you said, that I don't think this is only for people of a particular religion. We have to go beyond that. And what I'm hoping to achieve is that those who come along and kind of really take it seriously, think beyond the words I'm using, and like to think that that will open up an extra dimension, in people's lives, speaking psychologically as we've been doing, that you realize, coming to a realization that there's more than the sort of ebb and flow of everyday events and so on, that there's a way of connecting to a deeper quality of the psyche or a deeper quality of the world around us.
Beautiful. So, module one is called Deepen Your Divine Connection Through Kabbalistic Breathwork and the Names of God.
Well, that sounds a bit ambitious. I think we could spend all 7 weeks on just on that. And I think that's one of the issues, actually, trying to get everything. But my attitude here is to try and, we won't have the time to go into everything, of course not. But, to give enough of a sort of the trigger points, and then we can explore, and there'll be time for discussion and so on. But that first module builds on what I just gave as that practice. It's about breathing and the name of God. And I also want to bring in another dimension, which we haven't got time here now, and that is working with movement. Because for every letter, I work with different movements to try to embody the mystical quality of the letter.
Beautiful. Module two is called Integrate Kabbalistic Wisdom to Navigate the Quantum Age.
Well, again, I think we've touched on that, haven't we? What is the quantum age? It's physics, psychology, understanding the nature of reality. And I think the Kabbalah, I mean, that image I just showed about this sort of the concealed essence of thought, it's understanding a deeper way with reality. And, what is the quantum age all about? It's really probably one of the most important aspects of the quantum age is what's technically called entanglement, which doesn't mean entanglement problems with crazy people or whatever, but in quantum terms, it means that our understanding of cause and effect is much more complex than we thought. And, everything interrelates. And that's a fundamental of the Kabbalistic framework. Nothing happens independent of everything else. And to the work of Kabbalah, I would say, through all its complexity, working with very deep, complex texts, but ultimately the work of Kabbalah is to witness the infusion of that essence, call it the divine essence, in everything. Nothing is separate. We're all entangled. We're all interconnected.
Module three, Reveal Deeper Awareness with Consciousness and Kabbalistic Psychology.
Yeah, again, I think we touched on it already. The Kabbalistic psychology is to understand the psychology that is intrinsic to the Kabbalah. I mean, we may be talking about texts from 1,000 years ago or thereabouts, but they have a psychology. They're talking about thought. There are texts that talk about how do you work with thought? How do you get away from the ebb and flow, the mundane ways of thinking, and actually connect with ultimately the divine thought. So, Kabbalistic psychology is trying to understand in psychological terms what these quests were all about and still are all about. So I think, all spiritual traditions in one way or another are about transformation. We are wanting to achieve a higher integration or a richer sense of being. But at the same time, and this is a deep insight of the Kabbalah, is at the same time, as it were, the divine also needs to become complete, as it were. And this insight from the Kabbalah is that human consciousness is the way in which the divine achieves what it kind of intended through creation.
Mm.
So we're in a very deep way, we're sort of partners with the divine in creation.
It's a beautiful resonant perspective. Module four, Letters of Creation, the Writing on the Wall and Mysticism.
So I've already touched on this, that the letters, the Hebrew letters, are fascinating. I mean, I've been studying the Hebrew letters for 40 years and I continually see more depth in them. The question is, where do they come from? Where do these deep ideas come from? I mean, some will say it's from God, taking a more historical view. The form of the letters that we have today basically comes from a change in the letter shapes it was during the time that the Jews were in exile in Babylon. Now, the story of the writing on the wall is a common phrase, right? The writing on the wall. It comes from a book in the Hebrew Bible, the book of Daniel, and symbolically, the writing on the wall, no one except Daniel could understand the writing on the wall. It's a whole complex story, but essentially, why couldn't they understand it? Because it was the new form of the letters, and this is where the deep meaning in that time in Babylon, they're sort of meeting other cultures. Exile is a time, it's like a melting pot to integrate with other cultures. I think that's what happened in Babylon in that period of time. In the book of Daniel, talking about the writing on the wall, is all about that evolution of the letters, the Hebrew letters.
Hmm. Module 5, align your mind with the tree of life through biblical archetypes.
Stephen, it's amazing. I think we've covered all of this stuff already, so I'm going to say the same thing. We've touched on it in what we said, because I mean, I gave the example of Jacob, right? Jacob is the center of the tree of life. So all major biblical characters, uh, they're the symbols of the sphirot on the tree, and it's about understanding how they're actually within the individual, within yourself. And we think of ourselves as one and unified. Yeah, I am me, that's it. But in a more psychological insight, we know that it's not like that. There are complex characters within us in a way, and sometimes they pull in diverse directions, and that can be a psychological problem. But we're trying to integrate them, and the understanding the dynamics of the tree of life. And one way to do that is to think about the stories of these biblical characters. Then it brings it to life. And I just add one thing there, and we'll move on. But this phrase, aligning your mind with the tree of life, it's not just the mind. Maybe we should say aligning your being, because we said it's all embodied. And that's why movement practice, which we'll be looking at movement work throughout all of these modules. And that's why it's so important, because you can't be just flying off in your mind. It's embodied.
Module 6, gain an understanding of higher states of consciousness with Kabbalistic psychology.
Well, that's as we said, transforming the role of ego, going beyond the knots that tie us into mundane states and states that maybe don't really serve us. We get locked in these patterns, these knots. Is a good psychological symbol, and it's used in the Kabbalah as well. We get tied in these knots with everyday life, or different needs we have, and they don't always serve us. And so, higher states is about reaching for the self, reaching for the divine, maybe the divine within. We might think of it that way. So that's what a higher state of consciousness is. And we're using the texts and the ideas and the practices of the Kabbalah.
And finally, Module 7, deepen your spiritual path with a Kabbalistic movement practice.
So that's what we've been talking about. And I didn't have time to demonstrate that, but come along to the course and we will work with these movements. So each letter in the Hebrew, we have a movement. It's not strenuous. It's not kind of difficult, but it's just a way of moving the body to attune yourself with the mystical essence of the particular letter. So it deepens your spiritual path because it's a real way of working. So the tree of life, it's not just a sort of symbol out there. It's not just a mental exercise. There's a lot of mental work in the Kabbalah, but really This is not just the mental work. This is a spiritual path, which means embodied, and that's movement. That's being, and that's breathing, and that's deepening what it is to be in a relationship.
Hmm. Well, what a beautiful architecture for this program. And clearly, it's going to be deep and really nourishing and filled with wisdom. So, again, it's at KabbalahCourse.com. So, we've covered some of the 7 modules. In addition to those live sessions, which are each 90 minutes long, and they're each a great opportunity to ask your questions and engage live, you're also going to get recordings of every session, both video and audio, as well as word for word transcripts. There's weekly practices for home. There's a Facebook community to support you and deepen your experiences, as well as small group time to connect with other participants. In addition, there are a number of extra bonuses that Les has been very gracious in adding. There's a introduction to Kabbalistic psychology. Want to share anything more about that video?
Yes, sure. So it's I taught at university. I taught a whole course on consciousness and transpersonal psychology, and one of the options for the students was on Kabbalistic psychology. So this is a video of me introducing what I mean by Kabbalistic psychology and its potential and the ideas and practices as well.
Beautiful. And then there's also a 226-page ebook PDF that Les has created called Mind, Brain, and Human Potential: The Quest for an Understanding of Self. That sounds like a full book there. Anything you want to share about that one?
Yes, it was the first book I wrote, and it does exactly that. It's looking at what human potential is, and so I'm drawing on neuroscience. My original research background was in neuroscience, so I'm drawing on the neuroscience, the psychology, cognitive science, but also a great deal on the Kabbalah as well as other mystical traditions, actually, or spiritual traditions. So yeah, it's a long read. It may not be to everyone's taste, but I hope it would be, and you're very welcome
Mhm.
to have it for free.
It's great. A great extra bonus. And then there's one final bonus that folks get if you sign up by midnight tonight Pacific time. This is our little extra incentive to encourage you to tune in now and make your decision while you have the most information. And again, there's more detail at kabbalahcourse.com. This is Vellman's and the Transpersonal Reflexivity at the Core. This is a pre-publication article that Les has created, and it's a very intriguing title. What do you want to share more about that?
Yes, like a lot of the things we touched on, it's a longer story, but I think it's one of the most recent articles I wrote. So the book is going way back, and this article is bang up to date. Max Velmans is a colleague of mine. I've known him many years. He has a whole theory of consciousness, a reflexive theory, and that relates very strongly to the ideas in the Kabbalah. When we were doing that little practice earlier on, I stressed the importance of reflexivity. Really goes to the core of the Kabbalah. So I wrote an article demonstrating how that theory, Max Velmans calls it reflexive monism. It's very interesting, suggesting how we bring consciousness to the world. It's an interesting theory in its own way. But the article was exploring how Kabbalistic ideas relate to that theory and can, as it were, extend the whole idea at the core of that theory of consciousness. So it's really it's not just that it's up to date. I think that's one thing, but I think it does epitomize a point I've been making again and again in this session, Stephen, how how we can build this bridge. I think it's such an important bridge between modern philosophy and science and ancient tradition, ancient wisdom, in this
Hmm.
case, the Kabbalah.
Beautiful. Well, it's clearly going to be such a blessing for a course to go through this with you. And again, it's at kabbalahcourse.com. And so a few final things about it. We've kept the investment very accessible for this. It's just 3 payments of $128. So you save 10% when you pay in full with one payment of $349. The course is going to start July 24th and run Thursdays at 9 Pacific, noon Eastern. But even if you can't make the live times, you can still get the full value with recordings, the transcripts, and the community as well. There's some beautiful testimonials about Les and his teaching style, and beautifully balances sharing technical instruction and intellectual knowledge while making space for the emergent and experiential. Incredibly knowledgeable, thorough, and thought-provoking. You're really in great hands, and you're going to get a deep initiation into this important tradition, which I think is really, in many ways, the most integrative and balanced of any of our mystical lineages. So again, it's all at KabbalahCourse.com, KabbalahCourse.com. And if you sign up by midnight tonight, you're going to get that special PDF pre-publication article on Velman's and the Transpersonal. So Les, we're at the end of our time. Anything that's still on your
And I
heart?
was just going to say, sorry to interrupt, but if you do get that article, I hope you don't get put off by it. It's an academic article, but I think that you can read, you can skip some parts of it and see what's really going to come across well to you.
Hmm. Beautiful. Well, it's a great course, and you get that extra deeper dive article when you sign up by midnight tonight. And again, it's all at KabbalahCourse.com. And anything that's still on your heart you want to share with folks who are considering joining you?
Well, the heart is the right. It comes from the heart. Yeah, I think that it will be a way of delving deeper and really finding how we work from the heart. So I hope you come along. I hope you find it a valuable insight, and maybe it can bring more meaning into your life. Who knows?
Beautiful. Well, thank you, Les. You're really a joy and show so much wisdom. And thank you for all the years of practice and study to bring what we've heard today. So thank you for your
Thank you.
wisdom and thank you for your upcoming course. So again, it's all at KabbalahCourse.com and you'll get the special bonus when you sign up today. So many blessings. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye. Goodbye.